The rain was coming down in relentless sheets, slamming against the cracked windshield of my 12-year-old Subaru like handfuls of sharp gravel. I sat behind the steering wheel, shivering so violently my teeth rattled together, soaking wet in clothes that clung to my skin like a layer of ice. Through the blurred glass, illuminated only by the harsh, flickering yellow glow of the street lamp, I could see my childhood home. The heavy front door was wide open, casting a long, mocking rectangle of warm light across the front lawn where my belongings lay scattered in the deep mud. My favorite books, my work boots, my winter coats. All of it ruined. But the freezing temperature outside was nothing compared to the dark, bottomless void that had just ripped open in my chest. My ears were ringing. My heart pounded a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs, but all I could hear, playing on a relentless, agonizing loop in my mind, was the sound of my father's voice. His face, twisted in a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred, had been inches from mine as he roared the words that shattered my entire world. "Get out of my sight, Leech." He had snarled it. Not yelled. Snarled. Like I was some sort of disgusting vermin infesting his pristine, expensive life. My sister had stood just behind him on the grand mahogany staircase, holding her phone up to record my humiliation, a cruel smirk playing on her glossy lips. They had thrown me out. Erased me. Decided that a manipulative woman they had known for mere months mattered infinitely more than their own flesh and blood. I stared at the dark silhouettes of my family standing in the doorway, realizing with a sickening drop in my stomach that I had lost everything. My home. My father. My entire sense of reality. Before I tell you how I survived that horrific night and how I turned the worst moment of my life into a $55 million empire that eventually brought them all to their knees, let me know where you are watching this video from in the comments below. And please, hit that subscribe button right now if you have ever had your own family turn their back on you when you needed them most. My name is Marlo. I am 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I was the ghost haunting my own family. I work as a marine estuary conservationist for a small, underfunded nonprofit organization. If that title sounds glamorous or romantic to you, let me clarify exactly what my days look like. My job involves waking up before dawn, putting on thick, heavy rubber waders, and trudging through waist-deep, foul-smelling mud. I collect water samples, document declining fish populations, and fight desperately to protect fragile coastal ecosystems from corporate greed. It is exhausting, physically demanding, and often thankless work. It pays just enough to keep me above the poverty line, forcing me to budget every single dollar for groceries and gas. But I love it. I love the smell of the salt marsh, the intricate balance of life in the wetlands, the quiet dignity of nature that cannot fight for itself. It was a passion passed down to me by my mother right before she died. My father, Theron, could not understand my life if you handed him a detailed instruction manual. Theron is a commercial real estate developer. To him, a piece of land is only valuable if you can pour thick concrete over it, erect a massive glass and steel monstrosity, and charge astronomical rent to retail chains. He is a man who measures human worth exclusively by bank account balances, the brand of watch on your wrist, and the zip code you sleep in. Because I chose muddy boots over designer heels and environmental conservation over financial exploitation, I became the family embarrassment. The designated scapegoat. The invisible daughter whose small achievements were entirely ignored and whose daily struggles were actively mocked. If you want to understand the depth of the contempt I lived with, you just have to look at the museum of pain that was my childhood. Let us look at Exhibit A, my 18th birthday. For years, I had worked grueling part-time jobs, flipping burgers, tutoring kids, cleaning up after wealthy families, saving every penny for college. When the time came to pay my tuition, Theron sat me down in his dark, mahogany-paneled office and handed me a thick stack of student loan applications. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that my chosen major was a pointless hobby, not a career, and that he would not waste his hard-earned money funding my inevitable failure. I signed the papers with a trembling hand. I took on the crushing debt. I worked full-time while studying just to keep my head above water, watching my peers enjoy their youth while I aged a decade and 4 years. 2 years later, my younger sister Delaney turned 18. Delaney is the golden child. She is 26 now, calls herself a lifestyle influencer, and spends her days unboxing free makeup and taking heavily edited photos of expensive lattes. She has never held a real job in her entire life. For her 18th birthday, Theron bought her a brand new, pearl-white BMW. He tied a giant red bow on the roof and actually cried tears of joy when he handed her the keys in the driveway. When I quietly pointed out the massive disparity in how we were treated, I was called jealous, bitter, and ungrateful. Exhibit B was our daily family dinners. I lived at home in my old bedroom to save money so I could pay down my student loans. Every evening was an exhausting exercise in psychological endurance. Theron would ask Delaney about her follower count, her brand deals that paid in lip gloss instead of money, and her vibrant social life. Then he would turn his cold, assessing eyes to me. "So, Marlo," Delaney would chime in, swirling a glass of expensive wine. "Are you still saving those little frogs? That is so cute. Does it actually pay the bills yet, or are you just playing in the dirt to avoid getting a real job?" Theron would chuckle. A deep, resonant sound that felt like a rusty knife twisting in my gut. "Your sister has a good heart, Delaney. A terrible head for business and zero ambition, but a good heart. We just have to accept that she will always be dependent on us." But the most painful exhibit of all was the aftermath of my mother's death. She passed away when I was 22, after a brutal, drawn-out battle with illness that stripped away her strength but never her kindness. She was the only buffer between me and Theron's cold ambition. When she died, the heart of our family stopped beating. I was drowning in grief, desperate for comfort, desperate for a father. But Theron shut down. He poured all of his attention, all of his vast resources, and all of his fragile emotional capacity into Delaney. Delaney looked just like my mother, but had Theron's ruthless, superficial personality. She was his perfect, flawless mirror. I was left to heal myself, crying alone in my bedroom while they went on luxury vacations to Europe to grieve properly. I thought that was rock bottom. I thought the quiet, gnawing pain of being the invisible, unloved child was the worst thing I would ever have to endure in this life. I had made a fragile peace with my role as the family disappointment. But I was wrong. I had not seen anything yet. That was all before she walked through our front door. Her name was Rowena. She was 50 years old, though you would never be able to guess it from the thousands of dollars worth of fillers, Botox injections, and cosmetic procedures holding her face in a state of permanent, unnatural surprise. Theron met her at a high-end real estate gala downtown, the kind of event where the champagne flows like water and everyone is quietly calculating each other's net worth. According to the sickeningly sweet story they love to tell at dinner parties, their eyes met across a room full of wealthy investors, and they just knew. What I knew, from the very first moment she stepped a stiletto-clad foot into our house, was that she was a predator. Rowena wore elegance like a concealed weapon. Her clothes were tailored flawlessly to her thin frame, her jewelry was understated but obscenely expensive, and her signature perfume was heavy, suffocating, masking a scent I could only describe as deep, frantic desperation. She moved into our home with terrifying, calculated speed. Within weeks of their first date, her designer luggage was piled in the grand foyer. Within a month, she was sleeping in my mother's old room, having already dictated that the mattress be replaced. I watched, paralyzed by shock, as Rowena began marking her territory. It started with the small things. My mother had been an avid, passionate gardener. She had spent decades cultivating a beautiful, wild array of indoor plants that filled our sunroom with life, color, and a sense of peace. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from the marsh, exhausted, muscles aching, and covered in dried mud, to find the sunroom entirely empty. The plants were gone. The vintage ceramic pots were gone. "Oh, Marlo, darling," Rowena cooed from the doorway, sipping a dry martini. "I had the landscapers clear those out this morning. They were attracting such bad energy, all that dirt and moisture in the house. We need clean, modern lines in this home. Clutter is so lower class, do you not agree?" I stood there, staring at the empty spaces where my mother's life's work used to be, my hands shaking so hard I had to hide them in my pockets. When Theron came home, I tried to tell him. I tried to explain that those plants were the last living things my mother had touched, all I had left of her daily routine. He barely looked up from his glowing iPad screen. "Rowena has a wonderful eye for design, Marlo. Stop being so dramatic over some dead weeds." That was just the opening act. The vintage lace curtains my mother had sewn were ripped down and replaced with sterile, hospital-white blinds. The locks on the exterior doors were changed without my knowledge, and I had to beg Rowena for a new key like a common stranger. Rowena was systematically erasing my mother's presence, and by extension, she was erasing me. Behind the calm, elegant facade she presented to Theron, Rowena was consumed by profound, agonizing insecurity. She was terrified of aging, terrified of losing her looks, and above all, terrified of poverty. Her side of the bathroom counter looked like an unregulated pharmacy, overflowing with chemical peels, anti-aging creams, and prescription pills. She constantly hovered around Theron, her voice dipping into a sugary, infantilizing register whenever she asked him about his latest business deals, his stock portfolio, his offshore accounts. She was actively mining him for data, calculating his exact financial worth down to the last penny. She was intensely, violently jealous of the youth that Delaney and I possessed. But she was smart enough not to attack Delaney directly. Delaney was the golden child. To attack her was to attack Theron's massive ego. So, Rowena aimed all her venom at me. Because I did not flatter her. Because I looked at her and saw exactly what she was, a financial parasite wearing a silk blouse. The psychological warfare escalated quickly into a daily nightmare. She started planting toxic seeds in Theron's mind, dropping casual, venomous little remarks when she thought I was out of earshot. I would be walking quietly down the carpeted hallway and hear her hushed, concerned tone slipping out from the master bedroom. "Theron, my love," she would murmur, tracing circles on his chest. "I just worry about Marlo so much. It is so shameful for a woman of 29 to still be living in her childhood bedroom. Her friends must pity her. I mean, playing in the swamp all day while you provide the roof over her head? It is stunting her emotional growth. You are too generous, darling. You are enabling her failure. It reflects poorly on you." Every single word was calculated. Every heavy sigh was rehearsed in the mirror. She was painting me as a burden, a heavy stone dragging down his perfect reputation. And Theron, blinded by his midlife crisis and her hollow, transactional affection, absorbed every word as gospel truth. Rowena did not just want to be the new lady of the house. She wanted me entirely gone. She wanted my room converted into a walk-in closet. She wanted my share of whatever inheritance she imagined existed. She wanted me erased from the family tree. The air in the house grew toxic, thick with unspoken hostility that made it hard to breathe. I tried my best to stay out of their way. I left the house before sunrise, grabbing a stale piece of toast for breakfast, and came back long after dark, spending extra hours volunteering at the conservation office just to avoid Rowena's sickly sweet smile. But then, the real disaster struck, and it hit me from a direction I never saw coming. For 6 grueling months, I had been working on a massive federal grant for my nonprofit organization. It was a lifeline. It was supposed to secure our funding for the next 3 years, allowing us to legally protect a critical stretch of coastal wetlands from industrial development. I poured my entire soul into that proposal. I worked late nights, gave up my weekends, sacrificing sleep and my own sanity to build an airtight scientific case for the estuary's survival. I had mapped the migration patterns, tested the soil, and documented endangered species. On a rainy Tuesday morning, my director called me into her cramped office. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. The grant had been denied. Not just denied, but crushed by a competing bid. We were losing our funding at the end of the month. I was devastated, but what she told me next made the blood freeze solid in my veins. "Marlo," she said, her voice shaking as she handed me a printed document. I did some digging into the city records. The city council rejected our proposal because a private development firm outbid us with a massive lobbying effort. They bought the land outright. They are going to pave over the entire marsh for a commercial shipping center. She slid a thick manila folder across the desk. I opened it with trembling fingers. At the top of the corporate registration for the development firm was a name I recognized instantly. It was a shell company. A shell company owned and operated by Theron. My own father was the one destroying the very wetlands I had spent my entire adult life trying to save. He knew exactly what I was working on. I had talked about it at dinner. He had used my own research, my own passion, to identify a vulnerable piece of land, and then swooped in with his lawyers to pave it over for profit. It was a betrayal so profound, so deeply personal, it made me physically nauseous. I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. Because of him, I lost my job. Without the grant money, the nonprofit had to lay off half its staff immediately, and as the junior researcher, I was the very first to go. I was suddenly unemployed, heartbroken, and drowning in student debt, with no safety net whatsoever. I went home that evening feeling like a hollow shell of a human being. I needed comfort. I needed a parent. But when I walked into the dining room, I walked straight into a meticulously planned ambush. Theron was sitting at the head of the long dining table, slicing into an expensive roast beef. Rowena sat to his right, wearing a smug, contented expression, her wine glass full. Delaney was busy adjusting the lighting to take photos of her plate for Instagram. I stood in the doorway, my boots still muddy, and told them I had lost my job. I did not mention that I knew Theron was the reason. I just stated the bare fact, hoping, foolishly, against all odds, for a single shred of empathy. Theron did not even stop carving the meat. The knife scraped loudly against the china plate. "Well," he said coldly, not looking up. "I told you that swamp nonsense was not a real career. The free ride is over, Marlowe. You have wasted enough time." Rowena placed a perfectly manicured hand over Theron's wrist, looking at me with fake, exaggerated pity. "Theron and I were actually just discussing this exact issue, Marlowe. You are nearly 30 years old. It is highly inappropriate for you to be living here rent-free while you figure out your life. Theron is not running a charity. He is preparing for our future." I stared at her, my vision blurring with tears of rage. "I do not have an income. I have exactly $200 in my bank account. I just lost everything today." Theron set the heavy carving knife down. "Then you better find a job pouring coffee or sweeping floors. Starting on the 1st of next month, you will pay $1,500 a month in rent, plus your equal share of the utilities and groceries." $1,500? I choked out, gripping the door frame to keep from collapsing. "That is more than I made in a month. You know I am drowning in debt. You know what happened today." Delaney looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes and sighing loudly. "Oh my God, Marlowe, stop being such a perpetual victim. I am busy building my personal brand, which takes time and serious investment. You chose a useless job playing with dirty water. You have to pay the price. Dad is right, you need to step up." "She is building a brand," Theron agreed, nodding proudly at Delaney. "You are just refusing to grow up and face reality." I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my banking app on my phone. $214. That was all I had to my name. I was trapped. I was suffocating in my own home, pinned down by a father who had destroyed my career, a sister who mocked my misery, and a parasite who was orchestrating my financial ruin. I planned to swallow my pride. I planned to go out the very next day, apply for every minimum wage job in the city, and silently endure the abuse just to survive the harsh winter. I was willing to break my own spirit to keep a roof over my head. But I never got the chance to submit a single application. Because the next morning, I discovered that the cruelty in this house was not just psychological. It was criminal. It was a small, incredibly delicate thing. An antique gold locket, shaped like a teardrop, with a tiny, faded photograph of my mother inside. It was not worth much money on the open market, but it was the only piece of her jewelry I had specifically asked to keep after she died. I wore it every single day. It rested against my collarbone like a physical anchor to her memory. The fragile gold chain had broken a few days prior, so I had left it sitting on my wooden dresser to remind myself to take it to the jeweler for repairs. When I woke up the morning after the brutal rent ultimatum, My eyes immediately darted to the dresser. It was empty. Panic seized my chest. I tore my room apart. I stripped the bed sheets, emptied every single drawer onto the floor, crawled on my hands and knees checking under the heavy wooden furniture, running my hands along the baseboards. The locket was gone. A cold, dreadful certainty washed over me. I marched down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor, and found Rowena in the massive kitchen, casually sipping an espresso and flipping through a glossy fashion magazine. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. Rowena did not even blink. She slowly lowered the magazine, taking a slow sip of her coffee, and gave me a look of practiced bewilderment. "Where is what, darling? You look absolutely manic. Have you slept? Your skin looks terrible." "My mother's gold locket. It was on my dresser yesterday morning. You were the only one upstairs while I was out." "Hand it over, Rowena." Rowena gasped loudly, pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror, her eyes widening artificially. "Are you accusing me of stealing?" "Theron," she called out, her voice suddenly trembling with fake tears. "Theron, come quickly." Theron rushed into the kitchen from his home office, his brow furrowed in anger, his reading glasses pushed up on his head. Rowena immediately threw herself forward and buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing dry tears. "Theron, she is accusing me of taking her cheap little necklace. It is horrible. I feel so unsafe in my own home." Theron glared at me, his face turning red. "Apologize to Rowena right now, Marlowe." "She took it," I yelled, losing my grip on my composure, the grief of losing the necklace overpowering my fear of him. "It is the only thing I have left of Mom. It was right there." Rowena peeked out from Theron's shoulder, her eyes cold, calculating, and vicious. "You know, Theron," she whispered, pitching her voice just loud enough for me to hear clearly. "She was just complaining about having no money last night. Maybe she went to a pawn shop to get her rent money and is too ashamed to admit it. People do desperate, ugly things when their salaries are so pathetic." "That is a lie. You are a liar," I screamed, stepping forward. "Enough," Theron bellowed, slamming his fist down on the granite counter. "You are unstable, Marlowe. If you cannot treat my partner with respect, you will pack your bags today. One more word and you are out on the street." I fled the house. I could not breathe. The walls were closing in on me. I drove my beat-up car to the Estuary Conservation Station, where some of my former colleagues were sadly boxing up our field equipment in silence. I found Marin, my closest friend and fellow researcher, carefully packing away delicate water testing kits. I collapsed into a cheap plastic chair in the corner and broke down, sobbing uncontrollably into my hands. I told Marin everything between gasps for air. The impossible rent, the shell company destroying our marsh, the stolen locket, the twisted, gaslighting accusations in the kitchen. Marin stopped packing. She put down the glass vials, walked over, pulled up a chair directly in front of me, and looked me dead in the eye. Marin is a tough, no-nonsense woman who grew up in a rough neighborhood. She does not mince words, and she sees through lies instantly. "Listen to me very carefully, Marlowe," she said fiercely, grabbing my shoulders. "You are not crazy. You are not unstable. That woman is a textbook narcissist, and she is gaslighting you into the ground. She took that locket specifically to break your spirit. She wants you to lose your mind, to scream and cry, so your dad has the perfect excuse to kick you out." While I sat there trying to absorb Marin's blunt words, my phone buzzed in my pocket. And then it buzzed again. And again. Rapid fire. Rowena had successfully deployed her flying monkeys. I opened my messages to find a long, vicious text from my Aunt Sybil, Theron's younger sister. Sybil had always been a bitter, unhappy woman, eager to align herself with whoever held the most power and money in the family. "Marlowe, I just heard what you did this morning. I am sickened. You are breaking your poor father's heart. Rowena is a wonderful, classy woman who has brought joy back to his lonely life. To accuse her of stealing just because you are jealous and broke is pathetic behavior. Grow up, get a job, and stop acting like a spoiled brat." I swiped the notification away, feeling a wave of nausea, only to see a new alert from Instagram. Delaney had posted a new story to her 80,000 followers. It was a selfie of her sitting in her car, rolling her eyes, with a large, bold text overlay. Nothing worse than toxic family members who refuse to work and play the victim to ruin everyone's vibe. Cut out the negativity. They were isolating me. They were actively painting a false narrative where I was the villain, the crazy, jealous daughter trying to ruin her father's happiness. Marin read the messages over my shoulder and scoffed loudly. Do not reply to them. Not a single word. They want a reaction. You need to fight back, but you cannot do it with emotions. You need cold, hard evidence. If Rowena is as manipulative as she seems, I guarantee you she is hiding something much worse than a stolen necklace. People like her always leave a paper trail. Always. Marin was right. If I was going to be thrown out into the cold, I was not going down without a fight. I wiped my face, thanked Marin for her clarity, and drove back to the house. The driveway was empty. Theron was at his office, and Rowena had taken Delaney out for a luxury spa day on Theron's black credit card. I walked straight into the home office. Theron and Rowena shared a large desktop computer for managing household finances. Theron was old school and painfully careless with security. He wrote his master passwords on a yellow sticky note tucked under the keyboard edge. I logged in, my hands sweating profusely, terrified of what I might find, but knowing that the truth was my only weapon left. What I found in the digital trash bin that quiet afternoon was a financial nightmare of epic proportions. The large computer screen glowed brightly in the dim, quiet light of the home office. I had quickly downloaded a basic file recovery software I found online, praying silently that it would work. Rowena was cunning in her social manipulation, but she was not a tech genius. She had been dragging sensitive files into the recycling bin and simply hitting empty, assuming that erased them from existence forever. It took the software 45 agonizing minutes to run its deep sector scan. Every time a floorboard creaked in the empty house, my heart leapt into my throat, expecting her to walk in and catch me. When the progress bar finally hit 100%, a list of hundreds of recovered documents populated the screen. I started clicking through them rapidly. Most of it was useless junk, receipts for luxury shoes, emails confirming Botox appointments, dinner reservations. But then, buried deep in the list, I found a zipped folder named simply R_files. I unzipped it, opened the folder, and my breath caught painfully in my lungs. It was a vast labyrinth of financial documents. PDF files, bank transfer confirmations, scanned signatures, and international wire receipts. I began opening them one by one, my horror growing exponentially with every single click. Rowena had been systematically, methodically draining Theron's liquid assets. There were dozens of transfers, starting small during her first month here, $500 here, $1,000 there, but rapidly escalating in frequency and volume. 10,000. 20,000. She was moving the money from Theron's personal savings accounts into a highly shielded, hidden offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. A trust registered exclusively under her maiden name, which she had carefully kept active. I did the math in my head, my hands shaking over the keyboard. In the 7 short months she had lived with us, she had siphoned over $80,000 in untraceable cash. But that was not all I found. There were drafted emails to predatory real estate attorneys discussing how to secretly put a lien on our family home without Theron's immediate knowledge, leveraging the property to extract even more cash. My father was a ruthless, brilliant businessman in the corporate world, but when it came to his personal life, his massive arrogance made him dangerously blind. He thought his wealth made him invincible. He thought Rowena worshipped him for his intellect. He had given her unrestricted access to his accounts because she played the role of the submissive, caring, mathematically challenged partner so perfectly. As I sat there frantically taking high-resolution photos of every single document with my phone camera, capturing account numbers and dates, I heard the heavy front door unlock and swing open. Blind panic surged through me. I quickly closed the windows, shut down the computer, wiped the mouse with my sleeve, and slipped out of the office, pressing my back flat against the hallway wall just as Rowena walked into the foyer. She was alone. Delaney must have stayed in the city with her friends. Rowena was on her cell phone, speaking in a sharp, clipped, commanding tone that sounded absolutely nothing like the sweet, breathy voice she used with Theron. I held my breath, closed my eyes, and listened closely. "I do not care what the penalty fee is, just expedite the wire transfer today," Rowena hissed into the phone, dropping her heavy designer keys on the console table. "The old fool is hemorrhaging money on that stupid wetland development project. It is going to bankrupt his entire firm by the end of the year if the city zoning board delays the permits again. I need the cash secured in my trust before his creditors start sniffing around and freezing his personal accounts." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. She let out a cruel, mocking laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Theron? Oh, please. He is old, vain, and utterly stupid. You just tell him how big and strong he is, tell him he is a genius, and he happily hands over the platinum card. I am squeezing every last drop out of him. Once the accounts are dry, I am leaving him with the massive debt and that pathetic, broke daughter of his. Now process the wire before I find a new wealth manager." She hung up, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor as she walked toward the kitchen. I stood frozen in the shadows, my blood turning to ice. She was not just stealing from him to buy shoes. She knew his company was failing. She was preparing to abandon ship and leave him to drown in debt, and she was making sure she took all the lifeboats with her. A dark, dangerous calm settled over me. I did not just have evidence of a petty theft anymore. I had the nuclear codes to her entire operation. I snuck silently upstairs to my room, locked the door, and uploaded every single photo to a secure, encrypted cloud drive. I forwarded the links to Marin just in case my phone was taken or destroyed. I paced my room for hours, waiting. I waited for the sun to go down. I waited for the familiar sound of Theron's heavy car pulling into the driveway. My pulse was a steady drumbeat of adrenaline. I was going to blow her life apart. I was going to show my father exactly who he had chosen over me. I thought the truth would be my ultimate salvation. I severely underestimated the viciousness of a cornered predator. The final confrontation happened in the grand living room, right in front of the massive stone fireplace. Theron had just walked in from the garage, taking off his wet coat, complaining loudly about the sudden, violent storm blowing in from the coast. Rain lashed against the tall windows. Rowena was playing the dutiful wife, pouring him a glass of his most expensive bourbon. I walked slowly down the stairs, holding my phone tight in my hand, my heart hammering in my ears. "Dad," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the chaos in my chest. "Do not drink that. We need to talk. Right now." Theron sighed heavily, looking at me with profound exhaustion and annoyance. "Marlo, I am tired. I had a terrible day at the office. I do not have the patience for another one of your emotional outbursts today. Go to your room." "It is not an outburst," I said, walking closer, stepping into the light. "I looked at the computer today. I know where the money is going." Rowena froze mid-pour. The crystal decanter in her hand clinked sharply against the edge of the glass. For a fraction of a second, the carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. I saw pure, unadulterated panic flash in her wide eyes, followed instantly by a cold, calculating malice that was terrifying to behold. "I do not know what you are talking about, darling," Rowena said smoothly, setting the drink down on the tray with a steady hand. "I have the offshore transfer receipts, Rowena. Over $80,000 wired to the Caymans in the last few months. I also heard your phone call in the foyer this afternoon. I know his company is facing bankruptcy over the wetland project, and I know you are draining his accounts before the creditors arrive." Theron stared at me, his face turning pale. He slowly turned his head to look at Rowena. "What is she talking about?" "She is lying, Theron," Rowena cried, her voice pitching up in artificial, hysterical panic. "She hacked your computer. She is trying to destroy us because you asked her for rent." I held up my phone, opening the photo gallery to the brightest setting. "I have it all right here, Dad. Look at the screen. Just look at the routing numbers. It is all registered under her maiden name." I took a step toward Theron to hand him the phone. That was my fatal mistake. I left my flank open. Rowena moved with terrifying, animalistic speed. She lunged forward, not at me, but at the heavy marble coffee table sitting between us. Before I could process what she was doing, she raised her right arm high in the air and violently, brutally smashed her own forearm down onto the sharp, hard edge of the marble table. There was a sickening, loud crack, followed instantly by an ear-piercing, blood-curdling scream that ripped through the room. Rowena collapsed onto the floor, clutching her rapidly bruising arm to her chest, sobbing hysterically, real tears streaming down her face from the intense pain she had just inflicted on herself. Theron! Oh my God, she hit me. She attacked me. I froze, utterly paralyzed by the sheer insanity of what I had just witnessed. What? No, Dad, I did not even touch her. She hit herself. She threw her arm against the table. Theron did not look at my phone. He did not ask to see the routing numbers or the bank names. He dropped to his knees beside Rowena, his face contorted in horror as he looked at the dark purple bruise already forming on her pale skin. Delaney, having just arrived home from her spa day, ran into the room hearing the scream. Seeing Rowena crying on the floor and me standing over them holding my phone, she immediately pulled out her own phone and started recording. Oh my God, you psycho. You assaulted her. I have it on camera. Delaney screamed. I did not touch her. I yelled, tears of desperate frustration springing to my eyes. She is faking it. Dad, please, just look at the phone. Look at the evidence. Theron stood up. He did not look like my father anymore. He looked like a stranger, consumed by a rage so dark and terrifying I stepped back. He swatted his hand out and knocked the phone out of my grip. It hit the hardwood floor and skittered under the sofa, out of reach. You violent, sick, jealous parasite, Theron hissed, his voice vibrating with hatred as he stepped toward me. Dad, she is stealing from you. She said you were old and stupid. Please listen to me. I begged, sobbing openly now. Shut your mouth, he roared. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, silencing the room. Rowena whimpered pitifully from the floor, hiding a triumphant smirk behind her uninjured hand. Theron grabbed my upper arm, his grip tight enough to bruise bone, and dragged me forcefully toward the front door. I gave you everything. I put a roof over your head, and you repay me by physically attacking the woman I love because you are too lazy to pay your own way? You are dead to me. He threw open the heavy oak door. The storm outside was raging, rain blowing sideways into the grand foyer, instantly soaking the rugs. Dad, please, I have nowhere to go. I have no money. It is freezing outside. Get out of my sight, Leech, he snarled, shoving me hard out onto the porch. I stumbled backward and fell onto the wet concrete. Before I could even get up, Theron ran upstairs and came back down with my duffel bag and a few armfuls of my clothes. He threw them out into the mud. My books, my sweaters, the boots I used for conservation work. All of it tossed into the freezing rain like garbage. Never come back here, Theron said, his voice cold as ice. He slammed the door shut. I heard the heavy deadbolt click into place. I sat in the mud, the rain soaking through to my bones, staring at the closed door. I could hear Delaney laughing from the second-story window, capturing my misery for her followers. I gathered what little I could carry, threw the muddy pile into the trunk of my Subaru, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered and coughed before finally turning over. I drove 3 blocks away, parked under a broken streetlight, and turned off the engine. I was 29 years old. I had exactly $214 to my name. I was unemployed, homeless, and utterly alone in the world. I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking violently in the freezing car, and cried until there was no water left in my body. I thought my life was over. I thought the bad guys had won, and I would be broken forever. If you're still watching, please drop a comment saying, "I'm win." It is a secret code for the strongest viewers who make it this far, and I will be hearting and replying to every single one of you who comments it. Because as I sat there in the freezing car, I did not know that the universe was about to hand me a weapon. I did not know that the sunrise was going to bring a letter that would change the trajectory of my entire existence. The night I spent in my freezing car was a blur of agonizing physical pain and profound psychological shock. I woke up just as the sun was beginning to peek over the gray, miserable horizon. My neck was incredibly stiff from sleeping slumped against the driver's side window, and my clothes were still damp, clinging uncomfortably to my skin. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot and swollen, my lips cracked from the cold. I felt like a hollowed-out shell, scraped clean of all hope and dignity. I started the car, the engine protesting loudly in the cold morning air, and drove slowly to Marin's apartment. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug without asking a single question. She led me to her small bathroom, handed me a clean towel, and told me to take as much time as I needed. The hot water hitting my freezing skin felt like tiny needles, but it slowly brought me back to life. As I stood under the spray, I tried to piece together what I was going to do next. I had no job. I had $200. My father had violently disowned me over a lie. I needed to formulate a plan just to survive the week. When I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in Marin's oversized robe, I sat on the bathroom floor and started pulling my muddy, ruined belongings out of my duffel bag to see if anything was salvageable. At the very bottom of the bag, wrapped in a plastic grocery sack I used to keep my work notebooks dry, was a thick stack of unread mail I had shoved in there weeks ago and entirely forgotten about. I started tossing the junk mail into the small trash can. Pizza coupons. Credit card pre-approvals I could never qualify for. But then, my hand stopped on a heavy, oversized envelope made of thick cream parchment. The return address was embossed in elegant silver lettering, Callahan and Associates, Estate Law, Miami, Florida. My brow furrowed in deep confusion. I did not know anyone in Florida. I almost threw it away, assuming it was a scam, but I noticed the back of the envelope. It was sealed with actual red wax. You do not use wax seals for junk mail. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. Clipped to the front was a handwritten letter on personalized stationery. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and slightly shaky, like it had been written by someone with immense authority, but failing physical strength. I began to read. My dearest Marlowe, if you are reading this, it means I have passed on, and my attorneys have finally tracked you down. You do not know me, but I know you. My name is Corliss. I was your mother's older sister. I stopped breathing. My mother had mentioned an Aunt Corliss maybe twice in my entire life. She was the black sheep of my mother's wealthy, old money family. The story went that Corliss had refused to join the family's massive corporate empire, choosing instead to travel the world studying marine biology and eventually buying up vast tracts of coastal land to protect them from commercial development. The family cut her off, called her insane, and never spoke her name again. I forced my eyes back to the letter. I have spent the last 10 years watching you from afar, Marlowe. I hired private investigators to keep track of your progress. I saw you choose the mud and the water over the sterile, soulless boardrooms. I saw you fight for the estuaries. I saw the way Theron treated you, the way he looked at your passion with the exact same disgust my own father looked at mine. You have my spirit, Marlowe. You have your mother's kind heart, but you have my iron spine. You just do not know how to use it yet. I never married, and I have no children. Therefore, I am leaving my entire estate to you. The lawyers will explain the details, but know that I am leaving you with the resources to fight back. Do not let the people who destroy this world consume you. Do not let Theron's arrogance or that woman's greed break your spirit. Take what I have given you, stand up, and teach them a lesson they will never forget. With profound love and immense pride, Great Aunt Corliss. I dropped the letter onto the bathroom tiles. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the next document. It was a summary of the estate from the law firm. I read the numbers, but my brain refused to process them. I read them again, and then a third time, mouthing the words to make them real. The estate of Corliss was valued at $55 million. I sat frozen on the bath mat. $55 million. It included a sprawling, historic mansion in Miami Beach valued at $25 million and a massive liquid trust fund holding $30 million in cash and blue-chip stocks. I was 29 years old, sitting on the floor of a cramped apartment in borrowed clothes, and I was suddenly richer than my father had ever been in his entire life. I looked up at myself in the bathroom mirror. The frightened, desperate girl who had been thrown into the freezing mud just 8 hours ago was gone. In her place, I saw a woman who had just been handed a loaded weapon. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. I was not just going to survive. I was going to ruin them. What would you do if you woke up homeless and found out you were a multimillionaire by noon? Would you take the money and disappear, or would you stick around to balance the scales? Less than 48 hours later, I was stepping off a first-class flight into the humid, golden air of Miami, Florida. The transition from the freezing, miserable storm of my past to the sun-drenched reality of my future gave me profound emotional whiplash. A sleek black town car was waiting for me at the curb. The driver opened the door with a respectful nod, and I slid into the soft leather seats. I was wearing new clothes, simple, elegant, tailored pieces I had purchased during a frantic tower shopping spree with the emergency funds the law firm had wired to me. I felt like an imposter wearing a very expensive costume, but I held my head high. We drove to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Callahan and Associates. Mr. Callahan was a man in his late 60s, dressed in a sharp navy suit, with a commanding presence tempered by remarkably kind eyes. He stood up when I entered his vast corner office and shook my hand firmly. "Miss Marlowe," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "It is an honor to finally meet you. Corliss spoke of you with immense pride." Over the next 3 hours, Callahan walked me through the staggering reality of my new life. He handed me platinum cards, thick leather folders containing property deeds, and access codes to banking portals that displayed numbers with so many zeros it made me dizzy. "The Miami estate is fully staffed and ready for your arrival," Callahan explained, sliding a heavy brass key across the mahogany desk. Corliss employed a dedicated team. A property manager, security detail, and groundskeepers. They have all been retained by the trust, as per her wishes. They are expecting you. The drive to the estate felt like a dream sequence. We pulled into an exclusive, ultra-wealthy neighborhood right on the water. The town car approached a set of massive, wrought iron gates obscured by lush, tropical foliage. The gates swung open silently, revealing a winding driveway lined with ancient banyan trees. And then I saw it. The mansion. It was a breathtaking marvel of Mediterranean revival architecture. White stucco walls gleaming in the sun, a terracotta barrel tile roof, and huge arched windows that looked out over the sparkling turquoise water of Biscayne Bay. It was not just a house, it was a fortress of beauty and power. A small group of staff members stood near the entrance. The property manager, a warm, professional woman named Elena, stepped forward. "Welcome home, Miss Marlowe," she said. I spent the first few days simply trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the estate. There were 12 bedrooms, a library filled with rare first editions, a temperature-controlled wine cellar, and a private dock. But my favorite place was the massive sunroom. Unlike Rowena's sterile, empty vision of a house, Corliss's sunroom was a chaotic, beautiful jungle of rare orchids, towering ferns, and creeping vines. It smelled like wet earth and blooming flowers. It smelled like my mother. But I did not have time to just sit around and enjoy the luxury. I had a promise to keep. I had a lesson to teach. I called Callahan to the estate for a private meeting on the terrace overlooking the bay. I poured him a cup of coffee and got straight to business. "Mr. Callahan, my father's commercial real estate firm is currently attempting a hostile takeover of a coastal wetland in my hometown. It is a highly leveraged project. If he loses that land, his firm goes bankrupt. I need to know exactly how much it will cost to buy the debt on that land directly from his creditors." Callahan raised an eyebrow, a slow, appreciative smile forming on his face. "You want to buy his debt out from under him?" "No," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "I want to create a nonprofit organization. We will call it the Corliss Conservation Foundation. And I want the foundation to legally acquire that entire stretch of wetlands, permanently designating it as a protected wildlife sanctuary. I want to buy the land he is trying to steal, and I want to do it before the week is over." Callahan pulled out a silver pen and a leather notepad. It will require aggressive negotiations and a significant amount of liquid capital to bypass the zoning board delays he is currently facing. But with 30 million in the trust, yes, we can crush his bid effortlessly. Do it, I said. Whatever it costs. By the marsh. As Callahan began making phone calls to his network of aggressive corporate sharks, I stood up and looked out at the ocean. Theron had destroyed my career, mocked my passion, and thrown me into the street to protect a woman who was actively robbing him blind. He thought he was the apex predator. He had no idea that I had just become the ocean itself, and a massive tidal wave was heading straight for his fragile little sandcastle. But taking his company was not enough. I needed them to look me in the eye when their world fell apart. I needed to set a trap made of silk, gold, and their own blinding greed. Are you ready to see how a narcissist reacts when the person they abused suddenly holds all the power? Keep watching. The trap was remarkably easy to set. People like Theron, Rowena, and Delaney do not have finely tuned radars for danger. They only have finely tuned radars for money. 2 weeks after I moved into the mansion, the paperwork for the Corliss Conservation Foundation was finalized. I authorized Callahan to release a highly strategic press release to major financial publications. I did not mention my father. I simply announced the launch of a massive $30 million environmental protection fund led by the newly revealed heiress to the Corliss fortune, Miss Marlowe. It took exactly 48 hours for the article to hit the digital front page of a prominent financial magazine. I knew Delaney would see it. She spent her entire life scrolling through social media, desperately trying to project an image of wealth while drowning in secret debt. Sure enough, my security team informed me that a frantic series of searches for my name and the foundation had originated from Theron's IP address up north. They had taken the bait. 3 days later, the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was Elena, the property manager. Miss Marlowe, there is a black SUV at the main security gate. 3 individuals are demanding entry. A man claiming to be your father, accompanied by 2 women. Security is waiting for your authorization to turn them away. I smiled, a cold, hard expression that felt foreign on my face. Do not turn them away, Elena. Open the gates. Escort them to the grand living room, offer them the vintage Bordeaux from the cellar, and make sure the security cameras in that room are recording with full audio. I took my time getting ready. I changed out of my comfortable linen clothes and put on a tailored, emerald green silk dress that screamed quiet, untouchable wealth. I slipped my mother's repaired gold locket, which I had retrieved from the pawn shop through an investigator, around my neck. When I finally walked down the grand marble staircase, the scene in the living room was almost comical. Theron was standing near the massive arched window, staring out at my private yacht dock with his mouth slightly open, looking like a starving dog staring at a butcher's window. Delaney was furiously taking photos of the priceless antique furniture with her phone, clearly planning to post them as her own. Rowena was sitting on the edge of a white velvet sofa, gripping a crystal glass of red wine, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent room, calculating the immense value of everything she saw. They all froze when they heard my heels click against the marble floor. The audacity of their performance was truly breathtaking. Without skipping a beat, they instantly snapped into their designated roles, pretending the freezing night in the mud had never happened. Marlowe. Oh, my darling girl. Rowena gasped, leaping up from the sofa and rushing toward me with her arms wide open. I held up a single, flat hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. Rowena blinked, lowering her arms, and smoothly transitioned into a look of deep, motherly affection. We have been so incredibly worried about you. You just vanished into thin air. Oh my God, Marlowe, this place is insane. Delaney squealed, rushing forward. I always knew you were secretly brilliant. We are so proud of you. I already have so many ideas on how we can use the pool area for brand shoots. My followers are going to die when they see our new family vacation home. Our new family vacation home. I almost laughed out loud. Theron stepped forward, attempting to project his usual aura of dominant authority, though he looked visibly shaken by the sheer scale of my wealth. Marlowe, he said, using his deep, serious business voice. I admit, I was harsh the last time we spoke. Tensions were high. But you're my daughter, and family is family. When we saw the Forbes article, we realized you had inherited a massive, highly complex estate. A foundation of this size, it is far too much responsibility for someone with your lack of financial experience. He puffed out his chest, stepping closer. I am here to help you manage all of this. I can take over the foundation's investment portfolio, integrate it with my real estate firm, and ensure you do not lose it all. We can build a legacy together. I stood there, letting their pathetic, transparent greed wash over me. Theron wanted to use my money to save his failing company. Delaney wanted to use my house as a prop for her fake internet life. And Rowena just wanted to find a way to get her claws into the vault. Manage it? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly even, betraying zero emotion. You flew all the way to Miami to offer your financial expertise? Exactly, Theron said, looking relieved that I was seemingly entertaining the idea. You need a seasoned hand at the wheel, sweetheart. That is very generous of you, Theron, I said, walking slowly over to the wet bar and pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. Especially considering your own firm is currently defaulting on 3 major commercial loans, and the city zoning board officially rejected your wetland development project yesterday afternoon. The temperature in the room plummeted. Theron's face went chalk white. Rowena's hand jerked, spilling a drop of expensive red wine onto the white velvet sofa. How do you know about the zoning board? Theron stammered, his confident facade instantly crumbling into dust. Because, Dad, I said, turning to face them, the cold smile returning to my lips. I am the one who outbid you. The trap had sprung shut, and they were all locked inside. The silence in the grand living room was so profound I could hear the faint sound of the ocean waves crashing against the seawall outside. Theron stared at me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, like I was speaking a foreign language. You outbid me? Theron repeated, his voice barely a whisper. That is impossible. That land was tied up in corporate litigation. We had a verbal agreement with the bank. Verbal agreements mean nothing when someone walks in with $30 million in liquid cash, Theron, I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. The Corliss Conservation Foundation purchased the wetland debt this morning. We paid the bank in full. The land is now a federally protected wildlife sanctuary. You cannot build your strip mall. Which means, according to your heavily leveraged portfolio, your company is officially bankrupt. Theron staggered backward, hitting the edge of a heavy armchair. He looked like he was having a heart attack. He grabbed his chest, gasping for air. Rowena instantly jumped up, her survival instincts kicking in. She realized the money she thought she was stealing from Theron was suddenly gone. She turned on him like a rabid dog. You told me the project was secure. Rowena shrieked, dropping her wine glass onto the floor, where it shattered into 100 pieces. You told me the firm was fine. You old, useless fool. You ruined everything. Oh, Rowena, do not be angry with him, I interrupted smoothly. He is not the only one who has been keeping secrets about finances, is he? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sleek black remote control. I pressed a button. A massive, hidden projector screen silently descended from the ceiling, covering the grand window. The heavy blackout curtains automatically drew shut, plunging the room into cinematic darkness. What is this? Delaney demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Marlowe, turn the lights back on. This is creepy. I pressed another button. The high-definition projector flickered to life. The screen illuminated with crisp, 4K security footage. It was the living room of our old house up north. The timestamp in the corner showed the exact date and time of the storm. On the massive screen, 50 feet wide, we all watched in deafening silence as Rowena lunged toward the marble coffee table. We watched in horrifying, undeniable clarity as she raised her own arm and violently smashed it down onto the sharp edge of the stone. We heard the sickening crack of her bone over the mansion's surround sound system. We watched her collapse to the floor and begin faking her hysterical tears before Theron even entered the room. The video paused on Rowena's twisted, screaming face. The lights in the mansion slowly turned back on. I looked at Theron. He was staring at the frozen image on the screen, his entire body trembling violently. He turned his head slowly, looking at Rowena, who was now backed into a corner, her face pale, sweating profusely, the heavy makeup looking like a melting mask. "You," Theron choked out, taking a step toward her. "You broke your own arm. You faked it. You made me throw my daughter into a freezing storm for absolutely nothing." "Theron, darling, please, it is a deep fake. She manipulated the video." Rowena stammered, holding her hands up defensively, her voice shrill with raw terror. "It gets better, Dad," I said cheerfully. I pressed the remote again. The screen changed. It displayed a massive, highly detailed spread of financial documents. Bank transfer receipts, offshore routing numbers, and a clear, undeniable paper trail showing $80,000 moving directly from Theron's personal savings into a Cayman Islands trust registered to Rowena. "She has been draining your accounts for months," I explained, my voice echoing in the large room. "She was planning to bleed you dry and abandon you the moment the bankruptcy hit." And speaking of theft, I clicked to the next slide. It showed a high-resolution scan of a pawnshop receipt, complete with Rowena's signature and a photocopy of her driver's license. She stole Mom's locket. Sold it for $400. I had to pay an investigator $5,000 to track it down and buy it back. I touched the gold teardrop resting on my collarbone. Theron let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. He looked utterly destroyed. A broken, pathetic man who realized he had traded his only loyal family member for a cheap, thieving illusion. "And let us not forget the golden child," I said, turning my gaze to Delaney, who was trying to shrink into the expensive upholstery. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen displayed 3 different credit card statements. They were all maxed out. The total debt was a staggering $80,000. "Delaney," I said softly, "did you really think Dad would not eventually notice that you opened 3 platinum credit cards under his social security number to fund your fake influencer lifestyle? He is bankrupt, Delaney. He cannot pay those bills. Which means you just committed massive identity theft and wire fraud." Delaney burst into loud, ugly tears, burying her face in her hands. "I had to. I needed the clothes for my brand. You do not understand the pressure." The heavy mahogany doors of the library swung open. Mr. Callahan, looking incredibly imposing in his dark suit, stepped out into the living room, followed by 2 massive security guards in black tactical gear. Callahan held a thick stack of legal folders in his hands. "Rowena," Callahan said, his voice carrying the heavy weight of the law. "I am representing Theron in a massive civil fraud lawsuit funded entirely by the Corliss Foundation. We have already handed the offshore transfer evidence and the pawnshop receipts over to the authorities. There is a warrant out for your arrest." Rowena let out a visceral shriek of pure terror. She lunged for the front doors, her expensive heels slipping on the marble. The 2 security guards intercepted her instantly, grabbing her arms and pinning her firmly in place. She thrashed and screamed, her elegant facade completely shattered, revealing the feral, desperate creature underneath. My revenge was almost complete. But there was one final string to cut. The grand living room was a scene of absolute chaos. Rowena was screaming obscenities at the security guards holding her back, her designer dress wrinkled, her carefully styled hair flying wildly around her face. Delaney was curled into a tight ball on the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her $80,000 in fraudulent debt crashed down on her narrow shoulders. But my eyes were entirely focused on Theron. My father looked like he had aged 20 years in the span of 20 minutes. The arrogant, commanding real estate tycoon who had snarled at me in the rain was gone. In his place stood a hollowed-out, pathetic old man facing total financial and personal ruin. He looked from the massive projector screen to Rowena, and finally, his broken gaze landed on me. He stumbled forward, dropping heavily to his knees right in front of me on the expensive Persian rug. "Marlowe," he choked out, real tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his weathered cheeks. "Marlowe, my God. What have I done? I was blind. I was so arrogant and stupid. I am so profoundly sorry." He reached out a trembling hand, trying to grasp the hem of my silk dress. I took a deliberate step backward, out of his reach. I threw you out, he sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I threw my own flesh and blood into the mud for a thief. Please, Marlowe. I am begging you. You have to forgive me. I am your father. I looked down at him, searching my heart for even a fraction of the love or desperation I used to feel for this man. I searched for the little girl who just wanted her dad to be proud of her. But she was gone. The freezing storm had killed her, and the fire of Corliss's legacy had burned the remains. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical pity. You are not sorry for what you did to me, Theron, I said, my voice steady and devoid of all warmth. You are just sorry that you lost. You are sorry that the woman you chose over me stole your money. And you are terrified because you know you are bankrupt. Theron looked up, his eyes wide with desperate panic. Marlowe, please. The company. It is my entire life. You bought the wetland debt. You have the power to stop the foreclosure. If you just transfer the deed back to my firm, I can secure the loans. We can fix this. I will fire everyone. I will let you run the board. Please do not let me lose my legacy. He was still doing it. Even now, on his knees, surrounded by the ruins of his life, he was still trying to manipulate me for real estate. He did not care about our relationship. He only cared about the deed to the marsh. Your legacy? I asked, tilting my head. Your legacy was supposed to be your children. But you destroyed that. So now, your legacy is nothing. I looked at Mr. Callahan, giving him a curt nod. Theron, Callahan said, stepping forward. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the bank officially seized your firm's remaining assets to cover the defaults on your other properties. You have zero equity left. Your firm is dissolved. Even if Miss Marlowe gave you the land, you have no company left to build on it. Theron let out a devastating wail. He collapsed entirely onto the floor, clutching the rug, broken beyond repair. I walked over to the front door and pulled it wide open. Outside, the bright Miami sun was shining, reflecting brilliantly off the calm blue water of the bay. 2 local police cruisers were parked just outside the front gate, their red and blue lights flashing silently, waiting for Mr. Callahan's signal. I turned back to the living room, looking at the 3 people who had made my life a living hell. Mr. Callahan, I said clearly. Have security remove these trespassers from my property. No. Marlowe, please. Delaney screamed as a guard hauled her up by her arm. Where am I supposed to go? I have no money. Dad is broke. Get a real job, Delaney, I said coldly. I hear the local coffee shops are hiring. Rowena fought like a wild animal as the guards dragged her toward the door. You vindictive little parasite. I will ruin you. You hear me? I will ruin you. She spat the words at me, but they held zero power. The guards hauled her out the front door and marched her straight down the driveway toward the waiting police cars. She was handcuffed against the hood of a cruiser, her screaming echoing down the pristine street. Theron struggled to his feet. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a vast, empty despair. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer one last pathetic apology, but I cut him off. I looked him dead in the eye, channeling all the pain, all the rejection, and all the freezing mud of that terrible night, and I handed his exact words back to him. Get out of my sight, Leech, I snarled. And never come back here. Theron flinched as if I had physically struck him. He slowly turned around and walked out the door, his shoulders slumped, a broken king walking away from his fallen empire. I closed the heavy oak door. The heavy click of the lock echoed in the grand foyer. I stood in the sudden, peaceful silence of my massive mansion, took a deep breath and felt a profound, incredible weight lift off my chest forever. A few months have passed since that explosive afternoon in Miami, and the dust has finally settled. The aftermath of my revenge played out exactly as I intended, closing the darkest chapter of my life with absolute finality. Rowena did not possess the financial resources to hire a good defense attorney. Once Callahan handed over the massive cache of digital evidence and the pawn shop receipts, the district attorney offered her a harsh plea deal. She is currently serving 3 years in a federal facility for wire fraud and grand theft. The offshore accounts were frozen, and the money was legally returned to Theron's creditors. She lost her freedom, her stolen wealth, and the lavish lifestyle she was so desperate to maintain. Delaney was forced to face the brutal reality of the real world. Without Theron's credit cards to fund her fake influencer persona, her social media empire collapsed overnight. The bank sued her for the $80,000 in fraudulent debt. To avoid jail time for identity theft, she had to declare total bankruptcy and agree to a strict repayment plan. Last I heard, the Golden Child is working 50 hours a week as a waitress at a diner back up north, living in a cramped studio apartment with 3 roommates. She blocked me on all social media, which was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. As for Theron, he lost absolutely everything. His commercial real estate firm was completely liquidated by the bank. His massive house, the house I grew up in, the house I was thrown out of, was foreclosed on and sold at public auction. He now lives in a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. He occasionally tries to call Mr. Callahan to get messages through to me, begging for a 5-minute phone call, just to hear my voice. I never answer. He made his choice in the storm. I am simply holding him to it. Meanwhile, the Corliss Conservation Foundation is thriving. We officially secured the coastal wetlands, establishing a massive, federally protected nature reserve. I spend my days doing exactly what I love, putting on my rubber boots, walking through the salt marshes, and protecting the fragile ecosystems that my mother and my great-aunt cherished so deeply. The only difference is that now I write the checks and no corporate developer can ever threaten our land again. I have found a profound sense of peace. I go to therapy twice a week to unlearn the decades of toxic conditioning my family ingrained in me. I am learning that my worth is not defined by my productivity, my bank account, or the approval of people who are incapable of unconditional love. Yesterday evening, I took a long walk alone along the private beach behind my mansion. The sun was setting, casting a brilliant array of orange, pink, and gold across the calm water of Biscayne Bay. I felt the warm sand between my toes and listened to the gentle rhythm of the ocean. For the first time in my entire 29 years of life, I realized I was not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was not bracing for an insult or an attack. I was safe. I was powerful. I was entirely free. Sometimes, the most painful rejections in our lives are actually the universe violently repositioning us toward our true destiny. If Theron had not thrown me out into the freezing rain that night, I never would have gone to Marin's apartment. I never would have found Corliss's letter buried in the bottom of my muddy bag. I would have spent the rest of my life shrinking myself down to fit into their toxic, miserable little world. Mr. Callahan constantly advises me to keep my distance and maintain the strict boundaries I have established. He says Theron is a broken man who will only drag me backward. But part of me, the small, lingering part that still remembers the rare, good days of my childhood before the money corrupted everything, sometimes wonders if I was too harsh. So, I want to turn this over to you, the jury of the internet. Mr. Callahan advised me to cut ties entirely, but recently, I received a handwritten letter from my dad, apologizing and begging for a chance to talk, even if just for 5 minutes. Do you think a man who threw his own daughter out into a freezing storm for a thief deserves forgiveness? Was I wrong to use my inheritance to actively destroy his company and take everything from him? Let me know your honest opinions down in the comments section below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to catch more amazing stories. Remember, the truth always wins, as long as you are patient enough to wait for the sunrise. Stay strong.